pain. I wonder if I'll ever find my way. I wonder if my life could really change at all. All this earth, could all that is lost ever be found? Could a garden come up from this ground at all? You make beautiful things, you make beautiful things out of the dust. You make beautiful things, you make beautiful things out of us. Oh, you make beautiful things, you make beautiful things out of the dust. You make beautiful things, you make beautiful things out of You make me new, you are making me new. You make me new, you are making me new, making me new. You make beautiful things, you make beautiful things out of the dust. You make beautiful things, you make beautiful things out of us. Oh, you make beautiful things, you make beautiful things out of the
I want to begin this morning by asking you a question. If you held a picture up, just like in this video, and this picture showed you a glimpse of who you were with one word defining you, what would that picture look like? Who you are, what your life consists of, how do you spend your time, how do you spend your money, what do you do with everything that's valuable to you? If you held a picture up this morning, in your own opinion, in your own perspective, what would that picture look like? We're beginning a series this morning on discipleship. And as we consider discipleship, as we consider our mission as a church of becoming disciples, many of us, some of us in this room have actually just become a disciple. And so as we look at this mission of being a church, that is being disciples who are making disciples, the question in our minds isn't as much, man, how can I make other disciples? Because we're sitting here confused thinking, how do I become a disciple? And those of us who have been Christians for a long time and have been living a Christian life for a long time, it's so easy still to have that thought go through your mind. How in the world am I supposed to make disciples? And so we're going to talk about that over the next 5 weeks here. This past week, I read a quote by Bob Goff. If any of you have read the book Love Does, you've probably been incredibly blessed by it. If you haven't read Love Does by Bob Goff, I want to encourage you to do that. But this is a statement he made this past week. He said, and I just love this. He said, the past points a bony finger at us, and it says, you can't change. Grace holds up a mirror and says, you already did. And when we accepted the grace of Jesus Christ and became disciples of Jesus Christ, just like this girl in this video who tapped these people on the shoulder, took this new picture of them, and slowly they began to see a new image of themselves and see themselves in a different light. Jesus has done the same thing, and as disciples of Jesus Christ, as we actually become a disciple, and as we go through our life living as a disciple of Jesus Christ, it's very similar to this, in that the thing that once defined us, the thing that once was, it gave us an image, a picture of who we were, is no longer. And Jesus, and through a number of ways, begins to reshape us and remake us. There's one thing I just want to get out of the way quickly before I continue, and before we really get into this topic of discipleship. And that is the fact that I truly believe that healthy discipleship has less to do with what you're actually doing or where you're going than it has to do with who you're becoming. Healthy discipleship has less to do with what you're actually doing or where you're going than who you're becoming. And let me be clear, I'm not trying to say what we do as disciples of Jesus isn't important. I'm not trying to say where we go, where we spend our life isn't important. But what I want to really get out of the way and emphasize and really highlight this morning is the fact that what's truly important, what truly matters as we consider how do I live my life as a disciple, how do I lead this other person to become a disciple of Jesus Christ, what's important is who we're becoming. What's important is who they're becoming, not what we're doing or not where we're going. And the reason I want to get that out of the way is because it's really easy, not even just with our Christian lives, just at life in general. In our modern world, it's so easy to require ourselves to have lists. We have do's, we have don'ts, we have rules, everything's structured. This is how we live. This is how we understand things. And so we do the same thing with our faith. We do the same thing with discipleship. And so we say, okay, as a disciple of Jesus, I need to do this, I need to do this, I need to do this. I need to be going this place. I need to be putting myself into these environments. And it's easy to be so focused on all of these things that you're trying to do this checklist and make sure that you're doing everything a disciple does and not paying attention to who you really are inside. The important thing isn't what you're doing or where you're going. The important thing is who you're becoming. True discipleship, healthy discipleship, has you becoming a new person and changing and becoming different. We're going to jump into Scripture this morning. Let's open our Bibles. If you have a Bible here and you can actually see it, open it up to Matthew 4. So as we begin this focus on discipleship, this conversation about discipleship, let's look at one of the first examples we're given here of Jesus. So verse 18 to 22 of chapter 4. As Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. Come, follow me, Jesus said, and I will send you out to fish for people. At once they left their nets and followed him. Going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They were in a boat with their father Zebedee, preparing their nets. Jesus called them, and immediately they left the boat, they left their father, and they followed him. And so in the beginning here, This is one of the first examples we're given of Jesus calling these men to become his disciples. As followers of Jesus Christ, as we're baptized into Jesus, as we accept the grace that God has offered to all of us, to everyone, as we accept that and as we become a Christian, a follower of Jesus, we become a disciple of Jesus. This is an incredible story, an amazing example of Jesus going and calling these first men, just like this girl in the video we watched, tapping these people on the shoulder and them not really even knowing, what are you doing taking a picture of me? And Jesus takes a picture of them and gives it to them. And slowly they become these completely different people, defined not as fishermen. You see, as Jesus approached these men in their boats, they were fishermen. They were living out their livelihood, what they did for a living. And Jesus says, come, follow me, and I'm going to change your identity. I'm going to change who you're known as. And the amazing, incredible thing in this story is Peter and his brother Andrew, they left their nets. They dropped them and they followed Jesus. And James and John, they left their boat, they left their father, and they left for years. They left and they followed Jesus. And it's important, it's significant to note in this story that in this time, in the first century, it was a common thing, it was common practice for rabbis, for teachers at that time to have disciples, to have followers. They would actually choose men, and these men would follow them. And so this wasn't an uncommon thing. What was uncommon about it was the fact that Jesus called these men at a time when they were fishermen in their boats, working their livelihoods. And it's easy to read this story if you've heard it many times, or even if you've read it for the first time, it's easy to read this story and just simply hear the fact that these men followed Jesus. Of course they're going to follow Jesus. Jesus was the Savior of the whole world. Why wouldn't they follow him? But just picture these men in their boats in the first century in Israel. And this man comes up. They don't know specifically who this man is. They probably recognize him as some teacher, and he's calling them to follow them. But they left everything and they followed this man. I'm sure there was no way for them to have any idea of what laid ahead. And that 3 to 4 years from that point, that they would actually be before the rulers of the entire Roman Empire, being tried for turning the whole world upside down. They had no idea, and they left their entire livelihood. They left their families. Their identity changed, is my point. What we read in the story as these men, just a simple paragraph as we read Jesus calling these first men, it required of them to leave. How silly would this story be if we read Jesus coming to these men in their boats, fishing, and says, come follow me, I'm going to make you fishers of men. And they said, okay, and continued fishing, continued to live out that livelihood that they had. It wouldn't make any sense. No, they left everything and they followed him. And so as we continue to read through the story, we'll go to Luke chapter 9. So if you want to flip to Luke chapter 9, verses 23 to 25. And so Jesus has called these men to him. And this is the story we read in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, of Jesus calling these 12 men to be with him at all times, and they follow him. Discipleship in the first century, and what these men did, I should point out the fact that even the word being a disciple, what it meant in the first century was that these people were students. They were apprentices. They'd live under their teacher. They would model their teacher. Their life was shaped by their teacher. In some ways, they were literally becoming like their teacher. This is discipleship in the first century, what it looked like. And as these disciples are with him, he continues to teach them. And in Luke 9, 23 to 25, he says, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me is going to save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet lose or forfeit their very self? So Jesus in Luke 9 here, as he's speaking to his followers, to these men who have gathered around him, tells them, like they've already done, if you want to be my disciple, you must deny yourself. In other words, discipleship, being a disciple, requires, it's a mandatory, it's what discipleship requires is surrender, denying of oneself. There was a video I actually saw this past week, which I wanted to show and don't have time for it. But just like this stool here, this video displayed an empty white room and a stool in the middle of the room, and it was kind of a metaphor for, I guess, inside of our minds, the decision-making in our life. And it gave an example of this lady who was wanting to give Jesus the chance to make all the choices. So whoever was sitting on this chair was going to get all the choices, was going to make all the choices. And so it resembled, as we become a disciple of Jesus, as we surrender our lives to him, in essence, we're letting Jesus sit on this chair, the decision-making one. We're letting him make the choices for us. And so we no longer say, what do I want to do? We say, what do I want? What does God want me to do? What can I do to glorify God? What can I do to serve God? What can I do to grow in my relationship with God? And so we let Jesus sit on this chair. It was just like my life, and I'm sure just like many of your lives, that it actually gave this, the first person who wanders in is some friend who just dishonestly gained a bunch of money and they wanted to go on a spending spree, but she had a choice to make. And of course she wanted to go off and do all the shopping and spend all this money. And so Jesus begins to speak and make a choice and answer this girl for her, but she slowly finds herself actually kind of getting one cheek on the stool and starting to shove over and shove Jesus off the stool. And she ends up sitting back on the stool and making a decision herself and having this conversation with Jesus about what it really means to actually give up your life for him, and the importance of letting Jesus remain on this stool no matter how hard the choice is or how difficult it is. And so becoming and being a disciple is just like that. It's letting Jesus sit on the decision-making stool of our life. Interesting, here he continues, he says that we must take up our cross daily. The context, if we continue to read this, if we read just a little before verse 23, if we continue reading after verse 25, we'll actually read that this is in the context of Jesus speaking to all the people who are following him and sharing with them that actually he has to die, he has to be crucified, and that he'll be raised again. But he's sharing with them what his purpose is as the Savior, what he's going to be doing, this work that is ahead. And so he shares with them that they must take up their cross daily and follow them. And so as we consider this today in 2014 and what this means for our life, as Jesus has said, we must take up our cross daily. We must, as disciples of Jesus, be looking for the purposes that God has for us. Just like Jesus, the creator of everything, God, who became man, literally carried his own death instrument up to a hill and was nailed to it, and he bled slowly to death. This is the burden that Jesus bore, carrying his cross up to this hill. And as disciples of Jesus, God has incredible purposes for all of us. And we need to be living our lives as though we have a purpose, as though God has a desire for us. And we need to be living daily, fulfilling the purposes of God and not fulfilling the purposes of ourselves. And just one important word that's in this passage that is probably it's very convenient and it would actually be more comfortable to ignore is the word daily. The importance of this word daily. You see, becoming a disciple of Jesus is more than just one moment in our life. It's more than one statement we make. It's more than one choice and decision. It's more than saying, I believe. It's more than saying, I will follow. It's a daily decision. It's a daily journey. It's a daily path that we're on. I'll continue about that here in a moment. In many ways, some of us in this room are married, some of us aren't. But for those of us who are married, and I guess for those of us who aren't, the ones who are will understand exactly what I'm about to share. For those who don't, then you can be prepared for it when you experience it. But Chelsea and we met about, I don't even remember, about 12 years ago. And man, I knew that I loved her when I saw her, mostly because I was incredibly lonely at that time. But that was actually not a great way to share it. But the first time I saw her, she walked across the end of a hallway. I saw her for about 2 seconds, and my first thought was, who's that? And later on, I ended up asking somebody who I knew her, who was that? And I ended up finding out, and they ended up setting us up, and they set us up and forced us, because I was too much of a wreck. I couldn't talk to girls at the age of 21. And so they set us up and forced us to go on a date, and from the first time we went on our date, we actually saw each other every single day for, I think it was like, I don't remember, it was almost a couple months that we saw each other, but just we immediately connected. Actually, about 10 years and 9 days ago, was the day I decided I was going to marry Chelsea, as long as she agreed with me. But it was the day I decided I'm going to ask Chelsea to marry me. We were just out on a date, we were having supper, and I don't even remember why or how or what was going on. It was just, I just knew. And I almost asked her right there, but I didn't have a ring, and I didn't plan anything. And I knew actually we were going to be going to Paris in about 2 or 3 months, so I thought, I'm just going to wait, I'll plan something out. And so I made this plan. Let's go to the top of the Eiffel Tower, and I'll ask her up on the top of the Eiffel Tower. And so I very secretly tried to convince her, because at that time we were talking about marriage already, and I knew really like we were already talking about it, but I tried to convince her we should wait. It's not a good time to get married. I actually convinced her I really didn't want to get married right now, because I wanted it to be a surprise for her, which ended up, I shouldn't have done such a good job of that, because she was a little bit too shocked. But anyway, I did all this work, I bought this ring, and then I had to secretly get this over in all the baggage. And you know what it's like going through airports. And actually at that time, it was just after 2001, and so security was intense. I think this was actually 2002 or 2003, but anyway, I had to be really secret. It was this huge ordeal. I was just like a ninja trying to get the ring over there. We made it over there, and that first night, made plans. We're going to the top of the Eiffel Tower, and the funny thing is, I never even thought, what am I going to actually say until I got there? I just thought, well, we're after the Eiffel Tower, that'll be enough. It doesn't matter what I say, because it'll be romantic, right? And so we get to the Eiffel Tower, and I'm standing in line for the elevator. If you've ever been there, I've never been there, and I didn't realize the elevator was made of glass. And the Eiffel Tower is really tall. So not only do I all of a sudden have this thought racing through my mind, what am I supposed to say? I'm going up in this glass elevator to incredible heights. And so my heart is pumping out of my chest, and I literally have sweat pouring off my forehead, and like my palms are just soaked. I was terrified, and literally what I was thinking was, what in the world am I doing? We get to the top. After we're off the elevator, I feel a little bit better about that. But the whole time, it was at least 30 to 40 minutes as we wander around, we're visiting, talking. All I can think about is, what am I supposed to say? How am I supposed to say this? Multiple times I thought I'll just blurt it out, and then I couldn't speak. I had no words come out. I was just frozen. And the only reason I ended up asking her was actually because it was beautiful actually. The sun was setting. Anyway, we ended up, and she was just kind of hugging me. She had her arms around me. All of a sudden she's like, Peter, what's wrong? Like, what do you mean? Your heart is pumping out of your chest. And she literally thought that I was just scared of heights and afraid to be on the top of the tower, and I couldn't have that. So I eventually got down on my knee and asked her to marry me. I have no idea even what I said. Sorry. If you're romantic waiting to hear, I don't even know what I said. I'm pretty sure I asked her to marry me, though, because she said yes. So, but that's just an example of kind of who we were and the love that we shared with each other at that time. And what I really wanted to get to was the fact that we were married about 4 months later, and we had this incredible first year of marriage. And those of us who are married will probably relate to this a little bit, but in the beginning, there's what's known as a honeymoon phase. Everything is perfect. Oh man, we get to live life together. We're one. We get to share. Everything is exciting and new. And for some people, that honeymoon phase will go on for a few years. For some people, it's months, and for some people, it might be weeks or days. But what ends up happening with every couple, every married couple, is reality sets in. And then what once you thought was exciting, wow, we're one and we're living together, we make every choice together, this is so amazing, all of a sudden becomes, oh, we're living together. We're one. We have to make every choice together. And so in the years following that first year of our marriage, we began to have arguments over things like how our socks were folded. We had literal arguments about how to fold socks and what the best way to fold socks was. I really frustrated her with how I was folding my socks. If you come into our house, actually, right now, you won't see many pictures on the wall. Chelsea's actually a professional photographer and incredible pictures, and we have no pictures on our wall. It's because for about 6 or 7 years, it's actually scary. I can't even confess to you or share openly the terrible arguments we had about where to put pictures in our house, about whether or not we should have this picture there or that picture there, and whether or not they were straight. And it was the dumbest arguments, but small things like that. Most of the time it was me. What was important to me. They were this huge deal. Things like cooking. The cooking that I grew up with my mom, her cooking wasn't the same. And I just couldn't understand why she couldn't cook the same as my mom. And I learned the hard way that I just need to eat what's made and keep my mouth shut. I'm still trying to do that. But I've learned to communicate differently in that area for sure. The other thing is just organization. I am an organizational freak. I used to be. Everything had to be in order. And some of you, I know that there's one person in this room that is exactly like me, but I just don't understand why, if you could just take about 15 minutes and think through the 100 ways of doing something, you wouldn't do that. So you could sort through them all, positive, negatives, and then pick the best way to do things. So it could be organized. The perfect example is, where do we put the silverware in the kitchen? That choice shouldn't be made right away. We need to sit and talk about this for an hour or two, because we're going to be getting a piece of silverware at least 3 times a day. So just think of the time you can save and the convenience factor if you really decide where this is going to be in relation to where you're going to make your toast or where you're going to make coffee. Everything has to be organized that way in my brain, unfortunately for Chelsea. And that led to just incredible difficulty having communication and living with one another. And those are just some silly examples. There were far greater difficulties we had, huge ones with trying to communicate with each other, where I'd say one thing and she heard another thing, and she'd say something back and I'd hear a different thing, and soon we're having totally different conversations. And about 15, 20 minutes later, any of you guys, even if you're dating, you probably recognize this, about a half an hour into your argument, you wonder what you were arguing about. I can't even count the amount of times we've literally got to the point where, like, what was it again that we were actually arguing about? But marriage is difficult. My point and reason for sharing all of that is just the incredible example that marriage has given to me, I'm sure given to all of you. God instituted marriage. He gave us marriage, this incredible relationship as we become one with our spouse. What an incredible opportunity to learn about the incredible love of God, because as a married couple, it doesn't matter how you feel about your spouse. It doesn't matter this passionate love that you have. No matter who you are, that feeling, when that fades, when all of a sudden it's, oh, she won't let me do this, she won't let me do that, oh, I'm going to have to change this, I'm going to have to change that. What we've had to learn to do is love each other more than we loved who we once were. And so marriage, to me, how I would define it or describe it even, is just this experience of trying to learning how to love one another more than we loved who we once were. In other words, we have to surrender. I have to give up the way I fold socks so I can quit annoying Chelsea. I have to forget about the way my mom cooked all the food. I have to forget, literally, I've just abandoned, for the most part, I suppress it, this need and this desire and this really unhealthy way of needing to have everything organized and clean in the house, because I can't put that pressure on Chelsea. But I've had to literally give up so much of who I once was. When I was a bachelor before I married Chelsea, I am a completely different person, and all for the better. But I've had to surrender who I once was in order to truly love Chelsea. And I think this relationship that we have with God, it's such a great model. It's such a great example of being a disciple of Jesus as we actually ask ourselves, do we love God more than who we once were? And so as a disciple, we need to be asking ourselves this question, I believe. In other words, are we willing to actually surrender who we once were? Are we really willing to allow Jesus to sit on this chair and make the choices in our life? Let's continue. We've heard of Jesus calling these disciples to follow him for the first time. We've heard some incredible teaching and words from Jesus on discipleship. Let's go on to Acts 2, verse 38 to 47. Peter replied, "Repent and be baptized, every one of you, in the name of Jesus Christ, for the forgiveness of your sins, and you will receive the gift of the Holy Spirit. The promise is for you and your children and for all who are far off, for all whom the Lord our God will call." With many other words, he warned them and he pleaded with them, "Save yourselves from this corrupt generation." Those who accepted his message were baptized, and about 3,000 were added to their number that day. This actual paragraph we just read here, it comes at the day of Pentecost, this day that the Holy Spirit descended upon the disciples. They've waited since Jesus has left them as he instructed, and the Holy Spirit comes on them, and incredible things start to happen. And Peter, all of a sudden, this fisherman, who once was fishing in this boat, and Jesus called him and said, "I'm going to make you fishermen." He's preaching to this huge crowd that is gathered. And as he's finished, this fisherman, as he's finished his message, 3,000 people were added to their number. And then in verse 42, let's pick it up and let's read actually what actually took place in the early church. And so these disciples have been left by Jesus. And now this large number of people has been added. These new disciples, 3,000 of them at once. Let's just read how they lived life. How did they live their lives as disciples? How did they multiply themselves and actually make other disciples? So verse 42, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship and to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. And so what was taking place in this community of disciples in the first century, this example we're given as we strive to be this type of community? We read that they devoted themselves. So their lives were literally devoted to the teaching of the apostles. They devoted themselves to fellowship, what Jamie shared with us last week in such a great way, the significance of fellowship and living life with one another, holding each other up. Not enduring the pain, but going through life with each other and holding each other up through the difficult times. So they devoted themselves to fellowship. They devoted themselves to the breaking of bread, just as every time we gather here on a Sunday morning, we break the bread, we partake in communion with one another, and they devoted themselves to prayer. And what was the result of this? They were all in awe. There were wonders, there were signs performed by the apostles. They had everything in common. They literally lived daily together. It says daily they were together. They had everything in common. They sold their possessions, and they gave to anyone that had need. And the Lord added to their number daily. So in this community of disciples, they were growing. People were being added continually. The question I want to leave you with this morning, just to conclude, not even a question, I guess it's more of a statement, is it enough to say, "I believe"? And just before we really get into this conversation about discipleship, a few weeks back I shared with you the mission of our church, which is what we believe the mission of God is to be disciples who are making disciples. That is the call of God. That is the work of God, the redemption of lost people back into relationship with Him. And so as we're redeemed in a relationship with God, as we live these lives, we're also called to do that in others' lives and to live in community as we do that. And we're going to talk in future weeks here more in detail, more specifically about how this actually plays out in our life. But before we do that, I just would like to get our hearts stirring this morning with this question. Is it enough for me to say I believe? Is it enough for me to have made a choice in my life? I'm going to speak about it in a couple more weeks in detail, but you'll see in our logo a tree. You've seen it everywhere. I don't know how many of you have wondered why is that on the logo of this church. Why is that an image that we want portraying our church? But this image portrays people growing into a tree. And I'll speak more about it in the future, but just in this context of is it enough to say I believe? Of our being a disciple and discipleship being more than just a moment in time. It's more than one choice we make. It's more than one day where we've made a decision. It's the perfect example if we consider a seed that's being planted and begins to sprout, and it's just a little seedling. And as we actually decide, as we say, I believe, I actually accept this grace that God has offered. I believe that Jesus was the Son of God, and I commit my life to following him. What would be the result if we really believed that? I've spoken lots already this morning about who Jesus was. Just consider the fact this morning that with this belief, this faith that we claim to have as a disciple of Jesus Christ, if we're a disciple, we claim to know God as the creator of every single living, breathing thing, every star in the sky. This insurmountable, impossible to fathom, powerful, almighty, all-consuming, all-knowing God who is beyond our imagination. A simple, small, broken people who somehow we convince ourselves that I have control over my life and I know everything is. How can I even struggle with that? But we believe and we have faith in this God who knows everything. And as a disciple of Jesus Christ, I believe that the sin that I've committed in my life, the past that keeps pointing an ugly, bony finger at me, that my past is no different than spitting in the face of this God. That my sin that I've experienced in my life, as I continue to experience in my life, as I continue to struggle with in my life, that I literally turn my back on God. I look away from him, and I look for nothing other than what I desire and what I want. And all of us do that as we sin. That's pretty harsh, but focus on this. Let me finish with this. I believe as a disciple of Jesus Christ that this God, this incredible God, through Jesus Christ, says, I'm wiping it all away. It's gone. You're different. I forgive you. The grace of Jesus Christ through this incredible, it's completely undeserved love, literally looks at each of us. And he's done this for so many of us this morning. He said, you're forgiven. You're different. I'm giving you a new photo to look at. You're going to become a different person. If we truly believe this, there's no way our feet can stay planted. We can't help but turn toward this incredibly loving and gracious God and live for him and walk toward him. And that is discipleship. It's more than a moment. It's a movement. Discipleship is more than just a moment. It's a movement. It's constant movement as we grow closer and closer into relationship with God.